it looks like it's 2:15. We'll just kind of get started here. I know people will still be coming in a little bit over the next few minutes here, but want to thank everybody for joining us here to discuss financing your startup. Have a great panel here of founders and investors with Sue, Cody, and Rob. I will just be your moderator here. I'm Robert Keeley. I'm a senior at Clifton Larson Allen, and I focus on the technology and startup community. But I'll let the panelists here give a little brief background about who they are. Sue, if you want to get us started.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Robert. My name is Sue Marshall. I'm CEO and founder of an upcycling company called Net Zero. We have a sustainable platform that contains hard technology that takes industrial food waste, 6 billion pounds a year in the US of that, and upcycles that back into moving that forward and keeping it in the human supply chain so we can eat it. So example would be a brewery, spent grain, we process that, and then we sell it to people who make bread and cookies and all kinds of stuff.
Nice. Rob, if you want to kind of jump in here a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Rob, I'm one of the managing partners at a local venture fund, Great North Labs. We have a $23.7 million inaugural fund, and we reported last week kind of a progress update. We've now invested $11 million of the fund into local and regional startups, including 22 total investments, actually 11 of which are headquartered here in Minnesota. Makes us one of the most active seed Series A stage funds in the state, and happy to be on the panel today. I've also been an entrepreneur prior to starting a fund, so I have a bit of a founder's perspective. We scaled a business that's headquartered in St. Cloud to 70 million in revenue and 10 million in EBITDA, and we actually bootstrapped that company. So I understand, venture capital as an investor, but also understand other alternatives such as bootstrapping.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. Cody, if you want to describe a little about your background here.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Hey, everyone. I'm Cody Anderson, originally from Minneapolis, but have been in San Francisco the better part of the last decade. I joined a company about 5.5 years ago called Carta. They work with private startups to help them manage their shareholder base. So whether that's employees or investors, it's a cap table software offering, among other things. Have helped grow that company. We were about 30 employees when I joined and doing about $1 million in revenue. If you look at us today, we're sitting at about 900 and doing about $120 million in ARR. I'm also an advisor and investor. Full disclosure, I've invested in Net Zero, Sue's company. So yeah, looking forward to answering questions about navigating the crazy world of fundraising.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for kind of that brief intro. And everyone that's in attendance here, if you want to just let us know that you're here in the chat. We've got some questions we're going to go over, but if there are any questions that you have, we'd love to hear them. And if you'd be comfortable, we can even bring you up on screen to ask the panel directly. So if you want to just submit those all throughout, we can kind of do that. And then just to kind of get us started here, the first topic that I want us to kind of dive into is going into that first initial financing round. And Sue, I'll start out with you here. When you're moving into that kind of first stage, maybe you've done some of the self-funding and maybe a friends and family round going in to kind of get the company started and off the ground. What are you doing to prepare a company for that first outside investment?
Well, Robert, I think it's a great question. And looking back, I probably would hone in on a couple of things sooner, so we can go there to discuss that today too for the audience. But yep. I did start out of a university, so I did get a first round out of a university for pitching and winning contests, that kind of thing. So I had never done that before. So as a serial entrepreneur, I always did things the old-fashioned way, bootstrapped and traditional bank financing, because you can do that in real estate. Can't really do that in food tech. So I went into that whole pitching thing, and I made use of it as much as I could, got to know investors. And I would have done more of that, and I would have done that more intentionally, because I was doing it because people told me I needed to do that. That's what you do with startup now. You pitch and you do these things. But I didn't do it strategically enough. And by that, I mean really like thinking forward on the rounds. When you meet somebody at a certain stage, they might not be good right now, but they could be better, more forward in those rounds. So I didn't have enough strategy around that. running into people like Cody who could put some strategy around that was very helpful, but I would have done that a lot sooner. I'm from Minnesota, yay, and bootstrapping is part of my nature, so I probably bootstrapped a little long. So that probably would have taken a year off had I been a little more strategic on it. But I did try lots of things. I did a program-related investment through Venn Foundation. I'm a B Corp, so I got introduced to some alternative funding that can happen before larger rounds. And so I've tried making use of those as much as possible and extending, those rounds that take up equity. So I think that was the right thing to do. And now we're ready to do a bigger play here real quick, but I feel like I still own a big chunk of the equity. So I was able to get this far without giving a lot of that up right away, but we're ready now. And I've had a lot of help, so I'm fortunate.
Yeah. And now I know you had mentioned kind of bootstrapping there a little bit. Rob, I want to turn it over to you and discuss kind of what you were doing early on with the company that you had bootstrapped and kind of anything that you would maybe change when you were going through that process.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I think I had a mentor when I was in my late teenage 20 years ago. I just turned 40. But the piece of advice I got, this was in 2000, was, the best time to raise money is when, and that's what I thought I heard from Sue was, she was able to bootstrap it. Sure, things could have been easy with capital, but she was able to find a path without needing it. And I think that holds true most, for many entrepreneurs. Venture capital or other forms of investing in a startup usually are going to be accelerants to the business, but in most cases should be necessary. If you can show the execution that you can you have all the leverage and power in raising a round. And so I think if you can demonstrate, through the execution of your business that you have a path forward and your sort of default alive, then I think you're going to have a better. Nothing gets probably investors more interested than a company that, already is showing capital efficiency and ability to sort of move without outside capital. I think that, that's the best advice I ever got.
Okay. Cody, I don't know if you have kind of anything to add here of kind of preparing for those rounds, whether on the kind of founder side or even on the investment side.
Yeah, well, from the founder lens, and I'll, caveat this with the fact that I've never actually gone out and done it myself. I've worked with startups in a number of different capacities. But when you're thinking about taking on outside capital, especially like institutional, where like you're talking and engaging with people who they do this for a living, there's a couple of ways that there are a couple of things to think about. And one of the big ones is really like, it kind of just depends on who you are. Founders that have been out and done it before have a network that they can oftentimes rely on. I don't know if people saw it, but there was a company called Playco that just this past week raised a $100 million Series A, and they don't have a product. It's a video game company. They don't have a video game, but it's like the former founder of Zynga and a bunch of other people who have done it before. They just, that's like not the normal case. If you're doing this for the first time, to Rob and Sue's point, I think what you need to demonstrate is that you understand your business well enough at the current stage to really articulate what it is that you're going to be able to do as far as putting this capital to work, and then what it's going to drive as far as results, right? It's very much milestone based in the early days. It's like getting from this point to this point to this point. And yeah, if you don't have that, that Rolodex of investors that can just kind of come in and fuel you for the next 2 years, you have to really be able to hone in and say, look, with this amount of capital invested, I can get us here, here, and here. And then that potentially takes us to the next phase.
Nice. Yeah, and Rob, in terms of when you're looking at kind of investments of these early stage companies, what are some of the kind of key items? I know Cody had touched upon kind of a couple here, but what are some of the areas that you're looking at, especially early stage?
Did we just
I
lose
think
Rob?
there's. Okay. Hello?
We got you back.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Yeah, so I think the things that we would look for, there's a lot of risk in investing in early stage companies. So the first thing, the size of the market is compelling enough to warrant taking that risk. Secondly, we're investing, in the team, and that, I know that's kind of cliche. What we mean by, we know that at this stage, it's not at the early stage, the team is not complete. Often it's maybe a couple of founders working on a startup, or with maybe a couple of some help. So, we're looking for within the team, do the founders have they formulated enough perspective to really know the market they're going after and know what sort of beachhead they can build to get into that market? Do they have the action skills to build something in the market? And if not, do they have a plan to get those resources? But then I think the third part of it is, have they experimented with marketing yet? Do they have some kind of scalable customer acquisition method? This is probably the number one thing that we look for, that oftentimes the startup founders can't really articulate, or they don't, they're say, if you're still experimenting with marketing and go to market and you don't kinds of, and probably you're not ready for institutional capital, you probably want to be able to demonstrate, at least in most categories, that you have at least one primary method of customer acquisition that can scale. And if you haven't done that, that's okay. There's a great book on this. It's called Traction. I know there's more than one book called Traction. This is the one by the DuckDuckGo founder that built a search engine without private data. It's a really good book. It's written by an engineer. Takes kind of an engineering mindset to solving early customer acquisition experiments and how to kind of demonstrate that you have something scalable. And I'd highly recommend that book.
Nice. Yeah, and just kind of turning back over to Sue here a little bit, in terms of, as you were getting ready, you had mentioned kind of doing pitches, going through that phase. How in depth were you doing with your business plan, all of those other items that Rob was doing kind of at that time?
Well, obviously, in a field where there is no market because it's new, upcycling is a new industry, right? We went from a movement to an industry. And I like what Rob said, because at some point you got to demonstrate as a leader that not only, are you in a new area, you're really the person, right? Like, you're the person people around the country go to when they talk about upcycling. They end up in your email, right? So it is a lot about pivoting when you're doing something totally different in a new industry, in a new market. So, I'm okay with that. I acknowledge it now that, every couple months things are changing. That's one thing I can do, is I can be flexible. I am resilient, and I keep going. So when COVID hit, it's like, oh, great. That's cool. Throw another one at me, right? I'm so used to it. And then at some point you do have to demonstrate to scale. So I do believe pivoting, understanding, owning that. And I tell people who are younger, I'm like, you are going to change. You're going to do something different in 2 years. It might not even be your company, it might be a different company. But if you have the heart and passion for a certain thing that you're trying to accomplish, and a big, hairy, audacious goal like climate change and being part of that, it's going to take a lot of different avenues. So don't be attached so much today. Just know where you want to go, and then just be open to how that moves. And with those moves, different investors show up, because it's moving, right? So someone who might have been interested in year one, thought it was cool. By the time you pivot, they might go, that's no longer what I thought it was. That's okay. That actually means fine. That doesn't mean they won't be helpful. They won't introduce you to someone that now does fit what you're talking about. So the relationships that should always be continued is just realize that as you change, those people who were interested initially probably will too. And that's okay, whether that's investors directly or partners.
Yeah. I don't know if you wanted to touch on a little bit of just maybe some of the difficulties when you're really starting a new industry. You're taking that movement into a new industry, around what that initial kind of discussions are when you're talking to those investors, kind of what you've encountered with that.
Yeah, I think when you're food and agriculture is a lot different than a video game. It is also something that in the last 5 years, people really realize, especially since COVID, that we actually have to put in a lot of effort here. And that's not just money. There's all kinds of things that need to be done. But when you're out there on your own, you just tend to find people who are also as passionate about what's going on, and want to hook your train cars together, right? That's what we did. Literally, there was a dozen of us that I guess we're called upcyclers, that we looked at each other a couple of years ago and went, I guess that's what we are. And then we just hooked our trains together and we said, we're doing this. And then nobody could stop us at that point, since there were so many of us hooked up. A movement takes numerous people with the same passion to change something and to innovate on something. And then it's a long play. You know, you're hooking your train and you're not saying, okay, in a year, if this doesn't work, I'm detaching. You know, that it really does take a long perspective and a long game. That's hard to fund. It just is. And again, back to acknowledging it and saying, hey, I'm in for the long game. It's not going to be traditional investing to begin with. You're going to have to get grants. You're going to have to, you know, hang out with organizations that are probably nonprofit oriented, like in the, you know, climate change and food waste and sustainability. A lot of that is nonprofit work. And so little here, a little there, a little here, a little there, until you get some attention. And then once you get attention, back to that, you guys talked about they can see the scale opportunity. As soon as they see scale opportunity, then you can start running, I think, on the path of traditional investment. And sometimes people won't ever get there. Let's face the numbers. You know, not everyone does that kind of, ends up ever getting that kind of investment, right? And that's okay too. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that, you know, certain types of companies, apps, software, you know, those kind of things get some big, those rounds, like these $1 million with an idea. That's not happening in food and agriculture, things that really take rolling your sleeves up and doing actually like hard labor work with hard technology. So I think that you have to be realistic as to where you're playing, and don't get swoon into this. Yeah, but this person got $1 gazillion for having an idea. That's, like Cody said, that's just an anomaly. That's almost like some show you're watching, right? That's not real. So I think just kind of coming back to your, you know, what's real, what's kind of way out there, and you shouldn't even really give much consideration other than it's cool. Like I like those things, but they're cool. But that's not my everyday. I know what I'm facing. All of us that are working in this challenging time for climate change, we know it's a long battle, but we're also all connecting together. So that's the positive.
Yeah. Rob, one thing to say to that, because you know, and Sue can attest to this. I'm actually out here in San Francisco with another company that is in the same position. They're trying to reinvent how we think about cleaning our hands, like hand sanitization. They're using UVC light to do it. When you're creating a new market, the messaging is extremely important. Like, you have to really hone in on your message, have your taglines, right? Like, have your 1 or 2 sentences and be okay with saying them 150 times a day to everyone that you talk to. As old and annoying as it might get for you, you have to be relentless in terms of kind of getting that broader message out there for the masses, because it just takes more work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and stay true to that tagline too. Like, someone might say, well, what about this? Why don't you think about this? No, get really clear, like Cody said, and just keep on your message.
Got to have your beer and eat it too, right, Sue?
That's right.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'll actually ask a question that came up in the chat here. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, from Gaurav. More towards Rob here, and you had kind of talked about kind of scaling of the pipeline. They're wanting to know, does it change dramatically between bootstrapping seed and beyond through, or does it not? Does they need to kind of break it into parts of kind of how to get those first 10 customers?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're starting a company, there's probably 2 things that you're probably seeking at the very earliest stage. Maybe call that seed or pre-seed stage. You're probably seeking customer validation, and that may not require a large number of customers. You know, if you only need 10 customers, you could create like a customer advisory council, see if you could get some of your target customer segment to volunteer to give you like product direction and feedback. You know, for example, Compellant, which is one of our local unicorns, they famously used this customer council before they built their first product to guide them. And there was considerable R&D investment into Compellant's first product. Similarly, I see that happening now at Parallax, that we're an investor in, another Minneapolis company. Parallax is, you know, targeting it's like a kind of a utility to improve the efficiency for basically for like design and development shops, so that they're meeting demand with the supply that they have in terms of people resources. And they created a customer advisory council. But I would say though, if you're at a stage where you think you've gotten enough customer feedback, then the next stage is to find a scalable channel. And I would say if you suspect what might be a scalable channel is going to also aid you in customer feedback, you might as well try to find the scalable channel first. There's no reason to get your first 10 customers in a channel you know is not going to scale. For example, like referrals from your friends. Your friends might be able to refer you 10 customers, but unless you're like super popular celebrity or something, referrals probably isn't going to be enough. The one thing I would add, I think one of my other favorite quotes I took away, I think failing upwards is really important. And what I mean by failing upwards, as an investor, what we're looking for is adaptable founders who can take that customer feedback and that market feedback and adapt, their business to the right solution to solve an identified problem. And even if they identify a problem that maybe isn't as pervasive enough, flexibility in their approach to kind of get to the real problem. And many startups fail, and it's sort of what you do with failure. If you're just oblivious and ignore it and you just keep building, you're eventually you're not going to succeed. But if you make adjustments, if you learn why you're failing or why something's not working and you attempt to fix it, then I think that's really a key in building a startup.
No, yeah, that's great points there, Rob. And we've got a question from Gregory, and I kind of want to loop that into another question that I've got kind of back to kind of Cody and Rob here of when you're considering investments and you're getting pitches from some of these early stage companies, what are kind of some of the reasons that you've seen within those that you haven't decided to invest? And kind of getting into Gregory's question, is it bad to be a single founder? I don't know, Cody, if you want to kind of jump in here.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at it. It depends on who you are, what your business is, and who you're talking to, right? You've seen a number of examples of single founders, being able to make it work. You'll also engage with accelerators like YC who are just like, no, they want to see a team. And there's data to support why teams are more successful in the long run than single founders, but I don't think that anyone can sit there and tell you definitively like one way is the way to be. You just kind of have to look at it a little bit more holistically and understand like who is going to be able to, who are you going to have to rely on to provide some of that, strategic value and relationships and potentially capital, right? Do you want to go the accelerator route? And if so, are they going to require there to be a team, or, do you have a network of people who can, kind of help fund you individually to get to that next phase of the business?
Rob, do you have anything to kind of add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly a red flag if it's a solo founder, but it can work. I mean, we've invested in kind of solo founders, for example, Inhabitor in our portfolio, which is a furniture subscription business out of Chicago. He's done quite well. We invested a little over a year ago, but I do think it does kind of beg the question, like, is this solo founder, is there some interpersonal challenge that they may have that they can't, kind of recruit another founder? Is this founder going to be able to scale their leadership and management capabilities to build a great company? Those are kind of questions that, I'd be asking. And I would just generally say it's hard for a solo founder because I've yet to meet a single founder that has the variety of skills to actually launch a startup on their own. Say some combination of sales and marketing know-how, as well as engineering skill, or we invest in technology companies. So it's very challenging for a founder. So that's, I think, generally why we don't see many of them. I see a question here. I think Dustin asked a couple of other books. There's another one on early product design that I've been reading called Monetizing Innovation. I'll post it in the notes here. And actually, this is sort of when you're thinking about pivoting and how to get that initial customer traction, one of the things that I think people have really struggled with startups is how do you price, especially for a solution that maybe this doesn't yet exist. You're first to market, like sounds like Sue's business. I think that oftentimes, I think that one of the key elements of the book, Monetizing Innovation, encourages the founder to focus on really narrowing the focus to a specific buyer persona or a customer segmentation strategy. I think a lot of founders, some of the most successful founders I ever met, we mentioned the game industry. I had a middleware technology company. We sold the game industry. I remember talking to one of the founders, to create a hit in the mobile game industry is really challenging, right? There's 1 million+ games. And this solo founder kind of created this game that became a huge hit. And then he did an article on how did he do it. He literally talked about how he had a picture. He created this game for essentially targeting like young tween, kind of like a female demographic. He had a picture of this fictitious person with like a unicorn, this little girl. And he said at a design decision, he was focusing on that persona and that person specifically. And so that every element of the game was specifically designed with a specific person in mind. I think that's one thing I see with founders is they're maybe designing their products for a product and not a person. I think a greater customer segmentation and focus on that, that I would really encourage that.
Another book that will take it a step further in terms of identifying that first persona and then moving downstream to identify the others would be Crossing the Chasm. That's probably one of the most compelling books that I've seen in terms of kind of like how you want to attack a market from a beachhead all the way down to, you know, the late adopters per se.
Any recommendations that you have, Sue?
Great documentary I saw a couple days ago. It's called Kiss the Ground. Mm-hmm. If you want to take a look at climate change and carbon and what we're doing to this world, it was phenomenally done. Woody Harrelson narrated it. But what I loved about it is the idea of taking carbon and then actually doing good, sequestering it, and then how do we reverse climate change? And at the same time, all this innovation can come out of it, right? All these new businesses can come out of it. It was really well done. It's inspiring because some days, you know, Cody's there in San Francisco looking out his window. Hopefully you can breathe today, Cody. But these are real things we're facing, right? And so some days you're just like, between pandemics and fires, what are we doing? But then you watch a documentary like that and you realize how much opportunity there actually is for folks like us who think like that. It's like, let me at it. I actually know how I can change that. So I think that it's Kiss the Ground and it's on Netflix. It just came out.
I'm halfway through it. It's awesome.
Gonna have to check that one out here pretty soon here. Just shifting gears here a little bit, we kind of go on to the next stages of a company. So having gone through either that initial funding rounds and now you've got that large investment of capital now infused into the business. What are some of these kind of next stages that you're starting to take? And I'll kind of turn it over to Sue here.
Well, I'm not there yet. I'm still looking for investments. So anybody out there looking? But I do have a list of things I'm going to deploy right away. We're a licensing model, so we'd like to deploy that. Obviously, we're in proof of concept, and we're building some of these platforms to show people how they're going to be used before they can be licensed. So as far as a big investment, that's where the scale comes, right? When you're looking at 6 billion pounds of food waste that we're going after, I'm going to need a lot of platforms and a lot of licensing going on. So that's what I would do, is take that investment and just look at taking, okay, few pounds an hour to 1,000 pounds an hour, right? And with investment, you can do that. Once you dial in, I know we know how to do this. It's just that next round that can just really make a difference. So I'm excited. I mean, we're on the right path. We feel really confident. COVID might have taken us a little break, but the break was good. The break was looking at our customers, working straight with them. How much would you pay? What do you think? What is the license going to do? What's going to do it for? How is it going to work for them? How is it going to work for the people who buy the ingredients? So it was an okay breath to take. And then we did a lot of brand strategy work. I would have done that a year ago, maybe. Get that message clear, on task, so that when that investment comes in, we can just deploy.
Sure. And Cody, I know kind of with your experiences with Carta here and going through various different rounds of funding, just kind of what different experiences maybe are occurring as you're kind of going further down the road, or is it still a similar path?
It's similar. I mean, hopefully, you as a founder are able to demonstrate that you have. I mean, like if you're trying to raise venture capital, anyone that's going to invest in you is looking for that 10 to 100x return, right? So it's like, yeah, you have to start with a big market, but then you have to continue to demonstrate how you're going to capture like the next facet of that market, right? And so with Carta, for example, like the business started, we were called eShares. This was like in 2012. And all we did was issue electronic stock certificates. And VCs loved it because it was a way better experience for them. It involved less of the lawyers. Sorry if there's any lawyers out there, but we started with electronic stock certificates, and then we moved into the cap table, which was basically all of the stockholders and then the employees who would hold option grants, right? And then that was like our Series A and Series B. And then our Series C got us into working with investors directly. So we did back office accounting and administration for them. And now we're on to our Series, I don't know, E at this point. But we're trying to solve private market liquidity, right? So they're like the business, if you look at our Series A pitch deck, there's a reference of this is like, here's the trajectory and here's how we're looking to address each market and who we see in the market that we're going to potentially start to bump up against. And then continually just kind of like, again, that's why it's very important from the beginning to be like milestone oriented. So you can say, this is what we're going to do to get through that first phase of really owning the private venture cap table industry, and then getting into the VC industry, and then ultimately creating a product for liquidity to be realized for both investors and employees. And so, it's kind of understanding, to sum it up, it's kind of understanding that broader vision and then continuing to be able to execute along the way. And then understanding, though, the conversations that you're going to be having with investors will change, and the profile of the investor you want will change with it.
Hey, Robert, I kind of have maybe a comment to add to that. I think when designing your first product, almost all the successful company, I've invested in 50 plus companies, gotten many of them to exit, including my own. The thing that I've seen as a recurring theme of the successful companies is they have a very narrow beachhead kind of focus. So their mission for this sort of near term is very focused and narrow, so they can create value to solve a problem, but that's sort of backed up against a broad vision. And I think that's what I hear when I hear Cody talk about the early days of Carta. They started off with just electronic stock certificates. That the market for replacing stock certificates is not that big, but it solved a narrow problem acutely well. And then that sort of led them to their broader vision. And obviously Carta is a multi-billion-dollar company now. And I think that, I'll give you another example of this sort of broad vision, but narrow mission. We see this, we invest, probably about half the investments in our portfolio are online marketplaces. And I'll give you two companies that both started about 10 years ago. One I invested in, one I didn't. So Field Nation, it was the one we invested in about, it was 12 years ago. It was a labor marketplace. So think like Uber, kind of 1099 kind of labor marketplace. But instead of for ride sharing, it was centered around field IT labor. So you could essentially work with this 1099 network around the country and in Canada and find someone who could fix your computer. This was really geared towards the B2B market, unlike Geek Squad or whatever. And then on the other side in Chicago, founded around the same time, was a startup called ShiftGig. ShiftGig, oh, by the way, Manuel Khan, who started Field Nation, he raised 200 grand angel round. My brother and I did 100 grand of that. Didn't raise money for 7 years and bootstrap that thing until he raised 30 million growth and recap round like 5 years ago. He was quite successful because he had a very narrow, problem that he was solving. ShiftGig raised 30 or 40 million and basically, has with a broader vision of just being like a generic kind of labor marketplace. And ultimately, I know they've sort of pivoted a little bit, but they would love to have Field Nation's business right now. Let's just put it that way. So I think when you're thinking about your business, solve for a narrow problem against a broad vision. And really try to solve that problem well and look for signs that you're solving it well. You should try to, think about it, the beachhead you're going to have.
Yeah. To Rob's point too, right? And the way that I articulate this to the companies I'm talking about is like, who I think might even be in Crossing the Chasm is like, who are your 1,000 fanatics? Who are the people that are so excited about the problem that you're solving for one reason or another that like, they're not only going to like adopt it, but interact with you on a day-to-day basis. They're going to go, evangelize it to everyone that they interact with. And so, yeah, if you can get really narrow and identify those people, that's how a lot of companies are able to kind of get to the next step. And like all of this, that we're talking about, like it's worth reiterating or mentioning, maybe because I don't think anyone said it yet, but like the fundraising process was really hard. Like our CEO at Carta, Henry Ward, like he got no's on his first 26 investor conversations to raise his Series A. Like it's really difficult until it isn't. And that's, why so many people talk about like that founding team is like one of the big characteristics that they're looking for is just people that are gritty and willing to like grind and work until they find success in whatever, way, shape or form.
Yeah, I love that, Cody, too, because people need to know that their job will be fundraising for the first 10 years. That's just how it works.
Right.
And I feel like the bigger the challenge you're trying to solve on that wider, value proposition, the more that job's going to continue, right? That's just what it is, narrow mission. But if it's a broader, you're going to be raising money for a long time. I think it would be great. You said the 1,000 fans, who they are, because earlier we were on a discussion on equity crowdfunding. So Avizen's doing some of that work, and they're doing some work nationally. One of the upcyclers I work with is raising an equity round crowdfunding. And so I think that when you look at something new, like upcycling industry, and there's new technologies in it, perhaps, and with using Carta, thank you, Carta, to manage the cap table and all these things, which would be a nightmare without Carta. I think that could be, a valid opportunity in the future here, especially for industries such as food and agriculture.
Yeah. Well, you've seen examples of it with like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, right? These companies that it might not be equity, but they're saying, invest in us and we'll give you 2 products for the price of 1 when we're able to, complete our first manufacturing run, right? So, yeah, I mean, think about creative ways to align incentives, and there will be some guidelines changing as it relates to Reg CF and other private placement exemptions that should make this easier for a broader swath of investors.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Rob, I'll kind of turn over this next question here to you. When you have one of your companies that you've been investing in, whether it was kind of a first or second stage, and they're going to be gearing up and getting ready for the next round, what are you doing on the investor side, whether it's potentially infusing more capital for further investment or just kind of sitting back and they're going to maybe other outside investors?
Yeah, I think as an existing investor looking at follow-on investment, hopefully you created an advantage for yourself and you formed a relationship with the founding team such that they're going to kind of seek your counsel. And one way to maybe take advantage of that is, any of the portfolio companies we have, I always volunteer to review their sort of next stage funding decks. I can both add value for the startup, probably because I've seen a lot of pitch decks, but also it creates value for me because if I get a sneak peek before they're out, fundraising, that gives me more time. And I've already been obviously tracking the company if it's in our portfolio to kind of see. But I think, raising money is more about, in the early stages, it's about what is the future value of an investment. And I think in order to, show off the future value, you got to kind of show, you need to build a case using evidence of what you've experienced or what the market is telling you. And then sort of how does that shape your next, I would really focus on the next 12 to 24 months. You get too far beyond that and people aren't really going to believe you anyway. But I think if you can take, and then be really clear about your assumptions. It's funny, I see a lot of startups who pitch with an investor deck, but then they don't have like a basic financial forecast. I think that, if you're going to raise, especially as you're getting into maybe more of like a seed extension or a Series A, the further you get, the more it's going to be more expected that you sort of de-risk the business and that you have evidence and just make it clear in your pitch. Here's the assumptions we have. This is why we're based on it. If you haven't actually sold the product yet, what qualitative evidence have you generated to support that, that someone will buy it, but and then the later you get, it's, show that this sort of, that, show the evidence that supported your customer acquisition methods already working and scalable. And I think it's much less about some absolute revenue multiple on your current revenue run rate. Usually in startups, valuing a company on some kind of revenue multiple, you would undervalue all these companies. So you got to build a case for maybe 12 to 24 months out, where can you be? And can that support the valuation and the capital you're seeking? And I think if you can make a strong enough case backed by real world data, then fundraising then I think fundraising will go a lot easier for you. And but yeah, have a pitch deck and a forecast. That's what I would recommend. I see a lot of founders just create a pitch deck, and I think it can be a very basic model. The less levers or sort of KPIs that are, or the fewest amount of KPIs that drive the forecast, the better. And then if you can just quickly articulate what are those assumptions and what evidence you have to back it up, that's where I think the storytelling can come in.
Yeah, I'll turn it over quickly to Sue. I know you're currently going through these kind of investing rounds. If you had anything to add kind of for what you've been going through currently.
Yeah, I love what Rob said, because you tend to focus on like what you need right now. But if you can just paint that vision 12 months, what would it look like? Let's just assume you're getting what you need right now. What would that pitch deck look like 12 months from now? And start really working on that. It's kind of like that positive energy thing, right? If you put it out there, they're just going to fill it in, right? I love that. I do lots of pitch decks, and I was always saying, well, I have to have a pitch deck for these various audiences. well, why can't the audience be investors 12 months from now after you've done these following things? I love that. So thank you, Rob, for that. But I'm putting that in place this next few days. Cody's smiling. Yes, we are. That's great. Yeah, so I think, and again, that doesn't mean that necessarily even has to happen. Maybe it goes so well between now and the next 12 months that maybe you don't even need that round. Who knows? But I think always putting it out that far, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And kind of with about 5 minutes here to go, I want to make sure that kind of each of you get a chance to kind of give one takeaway for everyone that's here, whether it's for an investor or for a current founder, that they should kind of take away from here. And then we can, if there's any other questions, we can kind of cover those as well. So I'll turn it over, Sue, if you want to start on this.
Sure, I'll start. And this is personal, and it's what I've gone through, which is, gender bias, right? So stats don't lie, and that can be with people of color as well. And I said earlier about owning what it is that your values are. So if you're an impact company and you want to make a difference and you also want to make money, just acknowledge that that's a longer play. It's a longer run. So some of these conversations about, 10 times return in 24 months probably isn't going to apply to you, but that's okay. Just own it. And I think owning the fact that you are a woman or a person of color or some other group that has been oppressed, just own it. Just own it. That's what it is. There's nothing you can do to change that. And then this morning we had great conversations about how to embrace it and then start conversations to change it, right? Instead of, just getting angry, mad, and frustrated, there's ways to progress and change people's thoughts processes too. I always used to get this from investors. They're like, well, we invest in people we like. My perspective 5 years into it is they invest in people that look like them, because that is what has come out when I've seen. So I want to change that. I want to be part of changing that. I'm going to do it every day, and I can help and mentor people and get the conversations going around how we can change it, because I see so many great things, startups that could make a difference that are being held back by some of these challenges that are now we're having to face with social unrest and other things that we're going through because of these inequities. So going forward, I'd love to be part of discussions with investor groups, Rob, your group, whatever, and talk about how can we go forward and make some changes and some difference in getting this funding more out for some more diverse types of startups.
No, I think that's great there, Sue. Cody, if you want to add in.
I so wholeheartedly agree with Sue. I think that probably should take precedent over anything that I would say. Maybe one element to add to it is, companies now have the ability to structure themselves like Sue's as a public benefit corporation, which is, holding shareholder returns alongside of a greater social mission. And adding that to the part of the conversation too. So we're making sure that we align the long-term incentives with successful businesses. That would be the only thing, but Sue's spot on. We do a gender equity study at Carta. And the data doesn't lie. It's worse than you would expect from salaries as far as the disparity between the equity that men get versus women. And I'm all in on trying to help bring that conversation to the forefront.
Perfect. Rob, do you have kind of a final thought here that you want to leave with everyone?
Yeah, I got a final thought and then two little short stories tied into it. Focus on your customer, not the investors. I'll give you two quick stories. When I was 20 years old, 20 years ago, we raised 320 grand angel round, and I had a little hobby business that I sort of rolled in that was producing about 50 grand a month in free cash flow. This was right during the dot-com bust, so a recessionary period like the one we're in now. Our business actually started losing money in 2001 following the dot-com bust. And, we were down to our last 100 grand. It was like my life's work to get this startup off the ground and bootstrapped it. And I actually, we made a call to one of our larger customers. And this customer was very well funded and offered us $100,000. That $100,000 bought us the runway. That 5 years later, 2005, we were at 30 million revenue and 5 million EBITDA. So if you focus on your customers, even in the most dire of circumstances, and then, it's sort of funny. We were the first institutional investor in Dispatch based in Bloomington, Minnesota. It's about 3 years ago. Dispatch raised their first $1 million from customers. So Dispatch is like the Uber of the industrial category. After we invested as the first institutional investor in Dispatch, we were quickly able to close they had raised $1 million previously. Within 60 days, we were able to close the $3 million round they were seeking. We brought on a few other funds like Revolution, Rise of the Rest, Atlin Fund, Gopher Angels, etc. And then the Series A round and B round, it went quite a bit easier. In fact, the last couple of rounds have been so oversubscribed. Generally speaking, those that weren't into the earlier rounds never even had a chance to get in. But I think this is, clearly Dispatch, by focusing on the customer, that's a good way to generate. Think about customers you may have that have strong balance sheets. These could be, maybe a better form of early capital than, say, we don't have the strongest, angel community. It's a little more nascent here. But I think if you I would say just focus on the customer, and things will probably work itself out more than likely.
Yeah. One thing to add, we've talked a lot about those customers today, but my guess is that a lot of people on this thing, they're maybe in still like the ideation stage, or they might be pre-customer. It doesn't have to be customers. Find those people who are, if they're willing to engage with like a letter of intent to buy when you have something, or if they're willing to just give you their time or information, like those are places to start if you don't have a business to the point where you can actually, generate revenue.
All right, I want to thank everyone, Sue, Cody, Rob, for joining this panel and providing just great advice and experience for everyone. And I hope everyone has a great day here. I know there's a few more events here in Twin City Startup Week still going, with the closing event also tonight. So if you see me there, feel free to come up, kind of still socially distanced, and we can chat.
Robert, Lake Monster Brewing. Yay.
Yeah, shout out to Robert for putting it all together. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Robert, thank you. Nice.
Thank everyone, and hope you all have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.